All right, I'm not used to being mic'd, so is this an appropriate level of volume for everyone? We're good. So thanks, Steve, for that wonderful introduction, and thanks to everyone for the invitation to speak as part of this series. I'm really honored to be able to do this in my first semester at Penn. I just got here in July, and I'm incredibly honored to be speaking in such a beautiful space and with such an incredible number of people here who seem interested in this topic. So unlike the first speaker in this series, I'm here today to talk about a group of monuments that's not generally considered one of the great wonders of the world. However, I'm hoping to make a case for them, or at least to draw your attention to the fact that you need not travel very far to witness the type of monumental grandeur that's often encapsulated in such lists. So the Mississippi River forms the fourth largest watershed in the world, behind only the Nile, the Amazon, and the Yangtze, and runs 2,400 miles from Minnesota all the way to Louisiana. While the Mississippi became known to Europeans in 1541, when Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto crossed it in search of gold, silver, and hopefully passage to China, it had at that time already been a center for resource procurement, travel, communication, and trade for well over 12,000 years. Today, the Mississippi River Valley is home to 300 species of birds, an additional 300 species of fish, 150 species of reptiles and amphibians, and undoubtedly innumerable invertebrates. Its rich floodplain soils have always provided the most fertile soil on the continent, and combined, these characteristics have made it an absolutely ideal place to live since human beings first entered North America. Today, the valley produces 92% of the nation's agricultural exports, and it is still home to a large population, including the major metropolitan areas like New Orleans, Memphis, St. Louis, Minneapolis, St. Paul. More than 50 cities, including well over 20 million people, rely on the Mississippi daily for their water, and 50 million tons of goods are shipped up and down the river per year. The central portion of the valley has been considered one of only 7 independent centers of domestication in the world, where sunflower, squash, and a variety of starchy and oily seed plants were domesticated in order to fill the growing prehistoric population inhabiting the area. Starting nearly 6,000 years ago, the people inhabiting the valley signaled its importance and its abundance by building earthen mounds along the Mississippi River banks. Between this beginning and the arrival of Europeans, thousands, if not tens of thousands of mounds were constructed in the Mississippi Valley. My work personally focuses in the lower portion of this valley, particularly in Mississippi and Louisiana, but today I'm going to focus more broadly on the monuments that were built throughout the entirety of the valley. When Europeans first entered what is now the United States and found the landscape dotted with impressive monumental constructions, they thought that there was absolutely no way the mounds could have been built by the people who they met currently inhabiting the landscape. Instead, they hypothesized that they must have been built by, and I'm just going to give you a few examples, an ancient race of giants that no longer existed but were occasionally found buried in the mounds, Norse populations who left behind telltale runestones in West Virginia, a wandering band of Hindus who left India behind in search of the New World, bringing their beautifully carved elephant pipes to Illinois with them, by one of the lost tribes of Israel, who is said to have created this incredibly impressive map of the Great Lakes, or finally by the pyramid-building Egyptians themselves, who were nice enough to carve their entire pantheon into this rock in Vermont. So basically, in the minds of early European explorers, these options were all much more likely than believing that the indigenous people of North America could possibly have mastered such feats of engineering as you're going to hear about today. So setting these various hypotheses aside, discovering the identity of the mound builders through locating, mapping, and excavating the mounds of the Mississippi Valley quickly became a focus of early American archaeologists, and in particular, 2 landmark studies bear mentioning. The first is a book entitled Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley, published in 1848 by Ephraim Squire and Edwin Davis as part of the nascent Smithsonian Institution. They immediately dismiss Old World origins for the mounds. However, they suggest that they must either have been built by an ancient race of mound builders that no longer exists, or by the ancestors of the Meso and South American groups that were already noted at that time for their exceptional engineering skills. Again, they left the native North Americans out of it. A few decades later, a man named Cyrus Thomas was hired to document every mound left in the United States and once and for all set the record straight regarding the populations who constructed them. The map on the left up here is based on a report by him published by the Bureau of American Ethnology in 1894. All of the red dots mark the locations of prehistoric mounds that were recorded and located by Thomas. So pretty impressive number. I'm not going to try and make you learn about all of these today. These two reports came out of institutions based in Washington, D.C., but the scientific community that was thriving in Philadelphia in the mid-1800s also took interest. Around the same time that Squire and Davis were exploring the Mississippi Valley and mapping thousands of mounds, a man named Montroville W. Dickinson, a physician with the Academy of Natural Sciences here in Philadelphia, took up an innovative and very research-oriented program of excavation within the American South. On numerous accounts, both Squire and Davis were not particularly shy about sharing their disdain for Dickinson stealing some of their glory, but he went about his work anyway, and unlike many of his contemporaries, he took detailed notes on his excavations, he published reports, he published articles, and he collected huge amounts of material from the mounds themselves. Much of this collection, both the artifacts and the documents, is now part of the Penn Museum's holdings right here in this building. After his fieldwork, Dickinson put much effort into popularizing American archaeology, and many believe that he has not received due credit for his formative role in the development of public interest in the discipline. These images represent the advertising pamphlets for two public lectures given by Dickinson between 1850 and 1852. As you can see, I've stolen the title of my talk here tonight from the one on the left. I'd like also to quote just one line from that pamphlet. It's right here. It's hard to read for you guys, so I'll read it. It says, "Dr. D has devoted 12 years of his life in these investigations, having in that time explored the whole valley of the Mississippi, opened over 1,000 Indian monuments or mounds, and has a collection of 40,000 relics of those interesting but unhistoried Native Americans. Given that I have spent roughly the same amount of time in the field investigating mounds, I just did that math today and it's almost exactly the same, but I will admit I haven't dug in nearly as many. I'm hoping to live up to the second part of this quote, and I will say the paragraph ends, his lecture abounds in invaluable information and is worth alone double the price of admission, which at that time was a whopping 25 cents, so hopefully I can outdo him a little bit. So I also have to admit that my debt to Dickinson is even greater than stealing his title. As far as I'm concerned, he pioneered the use of PowerPoint in archaeological lectures. While he spoke, an absolutely incredible hand-painted panorama scrolled behind him, revealing scenes of his explorations and excavations. So before moving on to modern images and information about Mississippi Valley mounds, I thought I might show you just a little bit of Dickinson's panorama. Though at one time in the collection of the Penn Museum, the panorama now resides at the St. Louis Art Museum, where it is actively being restored and will soon be put on permanent display. It's 348 feet long, 7.5 feet tall, and consists of 25 scenes that were hand-painted by John Egan in the 1850s. Now, I don't have time today to show you all of these scenes, though I can tell you it makes for a really interesting lecture. I picked out a few highlights. The images that were painted by Egan were based on sketches made in the field by Dickinson and his brother. They tend to focus on earthen monuments, but often also show Native people inhabiting or utilizing the landscape surrounding the mounds. American archaeologists today have identified many of these sites as known, named sites, making the collections that are housed here at Penn an essential resource for the scholars that are now excavating at these locations. Of particular interest to me is this painting of the Ferguson Group in Jefferson County, Mississippi. This particular panel represents the site on which I wrote my dissertation. And unlike most of the panels in this panorama, the Ferguson panel actually depicts Dickinson's excavations going on right here in the largest mound at the site. The Penn Museum still has many of the artifacts from these excavations, which I was able to make use of in my dissertation research along with Dickinson's documents. And the pipe that's up there in the corner is actually on display in the Native American Voices exhibit right now, so you can go see it. Perhaps the most famous of the panels from this panorama is this one, depicting a bisected mound containing human burials and grave goods. It also shows the various layers of fill within the mound and thus represents one of the earliest depictions of archaeological stratigraphy that we have. Now, before moving on from Dickinson, I'm going to borrow just one more thing. I was in class telling my students that I was going to do this, and they assured me that everyone who gives these lectures always manages to insert a little bit of humor. And I was a little worried about that. I wasn't exactly sure how I was going to do this until I realized that, like visual aids, such as these, inserting humor into academic lectures is also an age-old practice and one that Dickinson did himself. So he actually had a, quote, humorous scene commissioned as one of the 25 panels of his panorama, which I'm sure took a lot more resources than me placing this slide into my PowerPoint today. Even though no transcripts were published of Dickinson's lectures, I do really wish that I knew what story he told while showing this one and how he related it back to mounds. But I'm not even going to try. I just thought I would insert this as an attempt at the humor my students say is so necessary. So thanks to the work by these early pioneers and many others who researched the mounds in the early years of American archaeology, the fact that the ancestors of Native American groups living in the eastern United States at the point of European contact built the mounds finally came into general acceptance. With that acceptance, the focus of American archaeology turned to understanding when, why, and under what variety of circumstances the mounds were constructed. And I'm going to try and answer some of those questions for you tonight. So what I have up here now is a chart showing the construction and destruction dates for the traditional 7 wonders of the world. As you can see at the top, the Great Pyramid at Giza, the topic of last month's talk, is clearly unique both in its antiquity and in the fact that it still dominates the Egyptian landscape today. Similarly, the monuments that we will be discussing this evening still dot the Mississippi Valley and were constructed at least started being constructed at least 1,000 years before the Great Pyramid at Giza. What I will do for the rest of this talk is discuss just a small number of these sites marked with stars at the very top and focus on the 6 different Native American cultures who constructed them. During the rest of this lecture, we will move through time discussing some of the earliest, some of the most elaborate, and some of the largest earthen monuments in the United States. So we know confidently that mountain construction in the United States had begun in the lower Mississippi Valley by around 3700 BC. But it's possible that it started much earlier and we just don't have the radiocarbon dates yet to prove it. One of the earliest confidently dated sites is called Watson Brake. It's located in northeast Louisiana, and Watson Brake consists of 11 dome-shaped earthen mounds connected by a causeway and built around a central circular open space, and that's a depiction of it up there on the top left. The largest of these mounds is approximately 25 feet tall, and I can say from experience that it towers over you when you stand close to it. The excavation of this and other early mound sites in the lower Mississippi Valley have shown that they were constructed by populations who lived in small, relatively mobile bands and relied solely on hunting, gathering, and fishing. So in other words, these monuments were constructed without intensive agriculture, without permanent settlements, and without strong political leadership that characterized most of the other monumental constructions that we hear about a lot, such as the Egyptian pyramids or the Mayan temples. So now we're going to jump forward in time nearly 2,000 years, but we're only going to move about 45 miles to the northeast of Watson Brake and look at the site of Poverty Point. Until the discovery and radiocarbon dating of Watson Brake and other sites in Louisiana, Poverty Point was thought to be the earliest monumental site in the United States, dating to around 1500 BC. One large mound, labeled Mound A up there on the map, 4 smaller associated mounds, all green rectangles up there, and 6 concentric earthen ridges surrounded an open central area. In 2014, Poverty Point was officially listed as a World Heritage Site, making it one of only 4 US prehistoric sites on that list, something we're very proud of, those of us that work down in the lower valley.